let's address the issue of management inside your data center. So what makes management of a highly virtualized environment difficult? Well, there are a couple of aspects to it. One is that the management and the service management aspects of the tooling has typically been weaker. It's followed a different demand curve. The demand for virtualization was initially, I've run out of space and power, or I've got all these expensive boxes and I'm only using 15% of their capability. So therefore, compressing that seems like a really good idea. So that has worked really well. Most companies have done some level of this kind of consolidation through virtualization. The management of that, though, comes, as I understand it, the issues with management have to do with managing where workload is in an environment and what's running where, and good insight into, for example, intrusion detection, things like this, which have been a little bit later in the maturity cycle of this story. So it's true that internally, managing a virtualized environment is different, because it's not like you can just look at individual physical ports and see what's there, because things move around and shape shifts all the time. Doesn't mean it's impossible, it just means it's a different kind of mindset to think about how it's governed. The other types of issues have more to do with how we used to staff the data center and do capacity planning, for example, is that it used to be you had a person-to-box relationship, and you could sort of figure out how many staff you needed based on how many machines you had in your data center. With the virtual environment, totally different. You may have one person who's responsible for, X number of physical boxes, but there may be hundreds of virtual machines, right? So it changes that whole concept, and you have to have people that, in the operations environment that really understand the differences between straight physical and virtual runtime, right? So it's a slightly different kind of skill and a way of figuring out who you need in the data center, right? So there's that aspect as well. In terms of capacity planning, it's a little easier because you're not provisioning physical compute all of the time. There are times when you do, of course, if you're reaching a limit, even in your virtual environment, you still need to consider build out. But capacity planning is easier because provisioning is faster. So it's very similar to the concept of adding MIPS to a mainframe application, right? It used to be that we would add MIPS, at processing times, at certain times of month in a bank, for example, to accommodate extra request time or extra requests. It's the same in the virtual environment. You spin up extra compute to handle load at different periods of time. All right, so this is what's happening internally. You take your internal IT and you extend it to external IT, the cloud, and the issues are the same. The difference is that you've lost direct control and direct visibility into that environment, and you may have the same or less visibility into the external environment. But then again, that's why you go to a partner, right? Part of the relationship with a partner is that they do that management for you. And the potential issue is, do you trust that person or that company in the same way that you trust somebody that you hire? Do you have the same level of control over them? And in this way, this discussion is not particular to cloud. I mean, this is a discussion we've had with outsourcing for years. And it's just, coming back to the same things. It's just a cyclical thing. And the difference is, of course, we're building it on, really new technologies. So measuring the cost of cloud services is, we're getting better at this. I don't know that there's a standard metric yet. But it inherits the problem in our own data centers that we don't really know how much it costs to run IT. Even when we're doing it ourselves, we don't know how much it costs. So therefore, any cost looks okay or bad or good or whatever when you're getting it from an external provider. What we've noticed, though, with some of our clients that have tested these waters, is that they learned that in some cases, transactional costs against the cloud are much higher than in their own internal data centers. Classic case is data warehouses. That transacting against a data warehouse, may be 3 or 4 times more expensive than doing it against your internal data warehouse. So at some point, the cost savings go away pretty quickly. The other thing too, and I often say it's like if you have a teenager and you give them a cell phone, and the first month of this you get your bill. And I mean, it's hundreds and hundreds of dollars, and it's because you didn't buy the right data plan and they were texting so much. We've seen other scenarios where the actual consumption fees were much higher than were anticipated and weren't negotiated correctly as part of the initial contract. So there's this sort of finding out what works and how much it costs and coming back and renegotiating. And as a result, the contract process and vendor management process for the cloud is getting a little stronger. But it was the Wild West there in the very beginning, where we were standing up solutions really quickly, onboarding people very quickly, and then figuring out what it cost. Right? So I think we're getting better at this. The other issue too, and it's very similar to a supply chain, and supply chain people would hear this discussion and think what's new about it, is that in any given cloud provider consumer scenario, you're probably dealing with a chain of consumer provider scenarios down the line behind that initial contract. In the same way that if I outsource development of a toy to China, that may be actually multiple partners involved in the creation of that thing, but my relationship as the requesting end of the party is with a single entity. Right, so the cloud scenario also has a supply chain where I may be dealing with a software as a service provider, but they have platform and infrastructure as a service providers, and maybe many of them in behind that contract. So what that means is that they're getting the advantage of outsourcing themselves, but you're also inheriting risk up through that pipeline. So that if the contract at any point in that is weak, at some point you inherit that weakness as part of the consuming party. So very similar kind of risk patterns as we have just in traditional manufacturing and supply chain, but a risk that perhaps IT technology is a young enough thing that we're still trying to get our arms around effective measurement and effective monitoring of things, and the cloud opens up the world to the point where we need to get much better at these things, of figuring out how much it costs, of measuring those costs, of making sure we're getting the value back from it, and that we understand the risks as they're inherited up through the chain.